Hey guys, tonight we begin with the strange and shadowy year of 536. A year so thoroughly cursed that even medieval peasants, who were not exactly strangers to misery, looked around and said, "Yeah, something's definitely wrong." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Take a deep breath now, letting your shoulders relax. Feel the quiet settle around you, and allow your mind to drift back in time, further and further, until the familiar sounds of your world fade away. Chapter 1. The Dimming Sky and Initial Impact. Let's set the scene. It's the early 6th century. You're a merchant, a monk, or possibly just someone hoping your turnip harvest doesn't fail again. Life isn't exactly glamorous, but it's predictable. The seasons come and go, the sun rises, does its job, and you complain about it like usual. There's a rhythm to existence, a comforting cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting. The world, though harsh, feels familiar. You understand its rules, its subtle shifts, its unspoken promises. You might grumble about the cold of winter or the searing heat of summer, but these are known quantities, part of the fabric of life. Then 536 hits, and suddenly the sun doesn't. At first it's subtle, a few grey mornings, a sky that just seems a bit off. People squint, farmers mumble, someone makes a joke about the gods oversleeping. You might wake up and think, odd, another cloudy day, pulling your simple wool tunic tighter against the unexpected chill that lingers in the air. The light filtering through your window feels muted, as if someone has placed a thin veil over the world. You step outside, perhaps to check on your livestock or begin your daily chores, and the familiar warmth of the morning sun is simply absent. It's not just overcast. There's a strange, lingering quality to the dimness, a flatness to the light that casts no sharp shadows, no vibrant colors. Days pass, then weeks. The sun continues its half-hearted routine like it's doing the bare minimum to not get fired. It rises, yes, but it's a pale, anemic disk, often obscured by what looks like a perpetual dry fog. This isn't the mist that curls off the river in the morning and burns away by noon. This is different. It's thick, persistent, and it doesn't smell like rain or earth. It simply hangs there, a strange greyish pallor that coats everything, muffling the world in a perpetual twilight. The birds, usually so vibrant in their morning songs, seem subdued, their calls less frequent, their flights more hesitant. The animals in the fields graze with a curious slowness, their instincts perhaps sensing the profound imbalance in the natural order. Across Europe and Asia, something is clearly wrong, and not in the rain ruined my toga kind of way. The Byzantine historian Procopius, not known for dramatics, wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness. That's historian speak for, this is deeply unsettling, and we are all going to die. Imagine the quiet horror of reading such words from a usually stoic chronicler. He describes it as a pervasive, unyielding darkness, a constant reminder that something fundamental in the cosmos had shifted. You can almost feel the chill wind that must have accompanied his writing, the tremor in his quill as he struggled to articulate an event that defied all known explanations. Other chroniclers describe a dry fog that blanketed the world. Not smoke, not mist, just a weird, lingering greyness that refused to go away. It didn't blow off with the wind. It didn't rain it away. It just hovered there, heavy and oppressive, like the planet itself was trying to send a vague atmospheric warning and no one was picking up. You'd rub your eyes, convinced your vision was failing, or perhaps that you hadn't fully woken from a disturbing dream. The taste in the air might have been subtly off, a metallic tang or a dry, dusty flavor that settled on your tongue. The texture of the air, usually so varied with the seasons, was now uniform, a thick, almost palpable haze that made distant objects appear blurred and indistinct. The result? A year that didn't behave. Crops failed to ripen. The tender green shoots that should have been bursting forth in spring remained stunted, their leaves yellowing, their growth arrested. The promise of the harvest, the very foundation of medieval life, was slowly, inexorably withering away. Trees, usually so eager to unfurl their new leaves and reach for the sun, stood in a kind of suspended animation, their branches bare or adorned with only a few fragile, pale leaves. Birds migrated in circles, disoriented by the false dawn and the constant dimness, their internal compasses thrown into disarray. The familiar patterns of nature, upon which all human life depended, dissolved into an unpredictable chaos. And humans, being humans, tried to explain it. Some said it was divine punishment, the wrath of an angered deity descending upon a sinful world. The priests, their voices ringing with newfound urgency in dimly lit churches, would preach sermons of repentance, their words echoing with a desperation born of fear. Others blamed sorcery, whispering about dark rituals and malevolent spells cast by unknown enemies. Eclipses were cited, even though this was a phenomenon that lasted for months, not hours. Or the sins of their neighbors, a convenient scapegoat for any misfortune. One guy probably blamed it on a goat. History never wrote his name down, but you know he was there, muttering indignantly about a particularly troublesome billy goat, while everyone else stared up at the sky in bewildered terror. Meanwhile, the average person, the villager, the farmer, the overworked scribe, just had to live through it. No sun meant colder weather, a bone-deep chill that no amount of fire or layered wool seemed able to banish entirely. Less food meant gnawing hunger, a constant companion that grew more insistent with each passing week. More confusion bred despair and social unrest as communities struggled to make sense of a world that had abandoned its fundamental rules, and absolutely no idea how long this cosmic prank was going to last. The uncertainty itself was a kind of torture, a slow drip of dread that eroded hope and resilience. 536 didn't start with a bang. It started with silence, a weird sky, a creeping sense of dread, and the unmistakable feeling that something was broken. The very air felt heavy with unspoken questions, with anxieties that settled deep in the bones. The ground beneath your feet felt less solid, the routine of your days less certain. Every morning you'd peer out, squinting through the perpetual twilight, a silent prayer forming on your lips. Please let the sun return. Please let the world be normal again. But the sun remained aloof, a pale, uninterested presence in a sky that seemed to have forgotten its purpose. And, spoiler, it was just getting started. This was merely the overture to a symphony of suffering, a quiet beginning to a profound disruption that would ripple through decades, changing the course of empires and the lives of countless souls. Just breathe and let the quiet images of that twilight world settle. Let the faint chill of the past touch you, but know you are safe, resting, letting the stories unfold. Chapter 2. The Global Crisis and Aftermath. So, the sun is up, technically, but it's not really participating. It's 5:36, and across the world, people are looking at the sky like it owes them an explanation. What once was a reliable, bright, mildly judgmental sun has now been replaced with a pale, low-effort disk that looks like it's calling in sick. You'd get more warmth and enthusiasm from a dying candle. The lack of vibrant light meant that even familiar landscapes felt alien, transformed into muted, sepia-toned versions of themselves. The greens of the trees were dull, the blues of the few clear waters were murky, and the colors of clothing or market stalls seemed to fade, as if washed out by an unseen force. The constant dimness seeped into the very spirit, fostering a pervasive melancholy that weighed heavily on everyone. Imagine trying to perform complex tasks like weaving or intricate metalwork when the light is barely enough to distinguish forms, let alone fine details. Every moment would have been a strain, every day a battle against the gloom. Eyewitnesses from Constantinople, China, Mesopotamia, and Ireland all noted the same unsettling thing. Daylight was barely distinguishable from twilight. You'd wake up and assume it was dawn. At noon, you'd assume you'd gone blind. At sunset, well, good luck figuring out when that was. The sun no longer set so much as wandered off quietly mid-conversation. Contemporary writers describe the sun as bluish and without shadow. Now, if you're wondering what kind of sun casts no shadows, congratulations. You're asking the same question every terrified 6th century human was asking right before they panic-prayed into their stew bowl. The absence of shadows would have been profoundly disorienting, a visual anomaly that defied all normal understanding of the world. Imagine looking down at your own feet and seeing no dark shapes stretching behind you, a ghost of yourself in the strange, diffused light. It would have felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of the natural order that confirmed the creeping dread in people's hearts. In China, they reported that stars were visible during the day. Let that sink in. You're tending your rice fields, look up and see constellations. That's not weather. That's the sky soft resetting. The ancient Chinese annals, meticulous records of celestial events, speak of yellow dust rain and snow in summer, painting a picture of profound meteorological chaos. The stars, usually reserved for the deep velvety black of night, sparkling faintly through the perpetual haze, would have appeared as tiny pinprick holes in the fabric of a broken reality. This phenomenon would have fueled intense fear and superstition, as the appearance of stars in daylight was often interpreted as a dire omen, a sign of cosmic disapproval or impending catastrophe. The very heavens, usually a source of comfort and guidance, had turned unpredictable and menacing. And it wasn't just dim, it was also cold. With sunlight filtered out by something mysterious and inconvenient, temperatures dropped, not in a pleasant hot cocoa kind of way, more in the your spring crops think it's January and your toes have stopped cooperating. Global temperatures dropped by up to 2.5 degrees Celsius, which in medieval terms is roughly equivalent to your entire food supply just died. Imagine the constant struggle to stay warm, to keep the fires burning, to huddle together in drafty homes, the chill seeping into your bones and making every movement stiff and painful. The feeling of frost on your breath in what should have been the warmth of May, the sight of ice forming on puddles when the crops should have been thriving, these were daily reminders of the world's profound disruption. It's worth noting that the people of 536 had no concept of atmospheric science. They had no clue what a volcano was doing thousands of miles away. All they knew was that the sun had stopped doing its job. And when your crops, warmth, and general will to live rely on that job, it becomes a bit of a crisis. Naturally, people looked for explanations. The religious saw divine punishment, interpreting every flicker of abnormal light or unexpected chill as a sign of God's wrath. The astrologers blamed ominous planetary alignments, poring over their charts in dimly lit studies, seeking patterns that might explain the cosmic malfunction. Local leaders probably blamed foreigners, bad omens, and that one guy in the village who always seemed a bit off. Whatever the explanation, one thing was clear: the sun had stopped trying. And when the main character of the sky calls it quits, you know things are about to get dramatically worse. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of fear and uncertainty, a palpable tension that settled over every conversation, every silent gaze towards the unnerving sky. At some point in 536, people started realizing it wasn't just the sun being moody. The entire atmosphere had decided to act weird. Across continents, reports came in of a strange phenomenon, a lingering, dry fog that didn't behave like any normal weather. It wasn't mist, mist clears. It wasn't smoke, smoke smells like something's on fire. This fog just was, like a vague, damp ghost following everyone around, ruining visibility and morale in equal measure. Procopius, the ever-grim Byzantine historian, described the sun as emitting light without brightness, and claimed this ghost fog hung over the world for a whole year. That's 12 months of not seeing the sky properly, not knowing what time it is, not knowing what season it is, and wondering whether this is just what life looks like now. Imagine the dull, persistent headache of constant low light, the strain on the eyes, the subtle shift in your mood as the world refuses to brighten, the feeling of dampness without actual rain, a persistent clamminess on your skin that makes you constantly shiver. In the East, Chinese sources noted yellow dust falling from the sky and, in an extra dash of surrealism, summer snow. Imagine waking up in July to find your crops frosted over and your chickens very, very confused. The snow, falling silently and unexpectedly in the warmth of summer, would have felt like a direct mockery from the heavens, a cruel twist of the knife in an already desperate situation. Ireland's annals speak of a failure of bread, which is poetic code for mass starvation, and also deeply Irish. You know things are grim when the bread is the first to abandon you. The grinding hunger, the slow wasting away of bodies, the desperate search for anything edible, these were the realities hidden behind that simple, ominous phrase. The taste of raw, bitter roots, the sight of desperate faces, the hollowness in the stomach that never quite left. So, where was this fog coming from? We now believe it was the aftermath of a volcanic eruption, or possibly more than one. Think of it as nature's version of someone blowing out birthday candles with way too much enthusiasm and ruining the entire party. Ash and sulfate aerosols got blasted high into the stratosphere, where they hung out for months, reflecting sunlight, blocking warmth, and making sure your winter jacket became a year-round fashion statement. Of course, the people of the 6th century didn't know any of this. All they knew was that the world had become dim, cold, and vaguely cursed. Crops wouldn't grow, rivers slowed, their surfaces often skimmed with thin ice even in spring. Entire regions stopped receiving rainfall, turning once fertile lands into barren dust bowls. Livestock began dying off, or just walking into the fog out of existential dread, probably. The silent fields, the empty barns, the mournful lowing of dying cattle, these were the sounds and sights of a world breaking down. And just when people started getting used to this new Twilight Zone reality, nature decided to spice things up by throwing in a bonus pandemic. Because what's better than fog that won't leave? A plague that follows it. Eventually, centuries after everyone had finished panicking and/or starving, science showed up late but helpful. Historians and climate scientists, armed with ice cores and radiocarbon dating, asked what made the sky go full Gothic in 536. The answer: volcanoes. Specifically, a big one, possibly two, maybe even three, because when the Earth throws a tantrum, it really commits. The leading suspect is an eruption in Iceland, a massive one. Imagine the Earth saying, "I'm tired," and then violently ejecting a few billion tons of ash into the stratosphere. That ash hangs out like a clingy X, blocks sunlight, and sends global temperatures tumbling. Greenland ice cores show a sharp spike in sulfur from that year. Basically, a frozen receipt proving the planet had an explosive outburst. Antarctica's ice tells a similar story, which is impressive considering it was minding its own business 10,000 miles away. But here's where it gets spicy. The first eruption may not have been alone. Evidence suggests a second eruption followed in 540, and possibly another in 547. That's right, this wasn't a one-time disaster. It was a trilogy, and not a fun one. The Volcanoes of Doom, Part 1, 2, and 3, now featuring extended hunger scenes and bonus plague. Ash and sulfate aerosols from these eruptions spread across the globe, reflecting sunlight and dropping global temperatures. Think of it as Earth's way of applying a thick layer of SPF 5000 to the entire planet, just without the sunscreen smell. In places like Mesopotamia, this meant failed harvests and economic collapse. In China, snowfall in summer. In Europe, grain prices skyrocketed, and not in the cool stock market way, more in the your neighbor just sold his goat for a sack of moldy oats kind of way. And just to be clear, nobody in 536 knew what a volcano was. They didn't connect the dim sun to some mountain thousands of miles away having an existential crisis. They just looked up, saw permanent twilight, and assumed God was in a bad mood, which, to be fair, is what it felt like. The constant low light, the biting cold that seemed to penetrate even the thickest clothing, the relentless gnawing of hunger. These were the daily, relentless torments that ground down the spirit. The air, thick with an unseen haze, seemed to press down on everything, muffling sounds and dulling colors. Every breath felt a little colder, every step a little heavier. And while modern science now understands the mechanics, back then all they had were terrified priests, terrified farmers, and skies that looked like the world had forgotten to wake up. So the sun's on strike, the sky looks like it needs therapy, and nobody knows what season it is anymore. Welcome to 536, now with bonus hypothermia. Just feel the gentle hum of the fan or the quiet around you, letting any lingering thoughts of ancient chill dissipate as you rest. Chapter 3. The Architectural Revolution. Gothic Cathedrals Rise. The 12th century didn't start with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper of stone blocks being hauled by oxen, and chants echoing from dusty construction yards beside crumbling Romanesque churches. Something monumental was stirring across France, England, the Holy Roman Empire, and even the distant fringes of Spain. Cathedrals began clawing their way up toward heaven. But why? Europe was changing fast. Cities were growing, trade was rebounding, and the church, well, the church wanted to show off a bit. It needed to remind everyone who was boss. And what better way to do that than by building the most awe-inspiring, terrifyingly massive buildings anyone had ever seen. These weren't simple upgrades. This was a full-on architectural arms race. Imagine the pride and competitive spirit stirring in these growing towns. Towns competed with each other not through war, but through stone. If one city built a church with a 50-foot nave, the next wanted one twice as long, with more stained glass, more towers, more miracles carved in limestone. The sheer scale of ambition was breathtaking. Bishops wanted their legacy in stone, a permanent testament to their piety and power. Kings wanted the people to see divine authority in architecture, to be humbled and awestruck by the sheer magnitude of their faith embodied in towering edifices. And ordinary people, they were just trying to get into heaven, one coin, one pilgrimage, one back-breaking labor shift at a time. The scent of mortar and freshly cut stone would have permeated the air around these rising giants, mixing with the sweat of hundreds of laborers. The rhythmic sound of hammers chipping at rock, the creak of wooden cranes, the distant shouts of foremen. These were the daily soundtrack of a continent consumed by a monumental endeavor. And yet, none of this would have worked if someone hadn't figured out how to cheat gravity. Enter the Gothic style. This new approach flipped everything people thought they knew about church design. No more thick, squat walls reminiscent of Roman fortresses. No more tiny, narrow windows that let in just enough light to remind you that daylight existed, making the interior feel perpetually dim and heavy. Gothic architecture embraced air and light. It wanted God to see in and for you to see out, to bathe the worshipper in a luminous, almost ethereal glow. Pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and those miraculous flying buttresses. All of it was about going up, letting in more light, and making people feel utterly insignificant in the presence of the divine. The very structure seemed to defy the earthly realm, pushing upwards, ever upwards, towards the heavens. Imagine the gasp of wonder as someone stepped from the muddy, chaotic streets into the soaring, light-filled interior for the very first time. What started with modest experiments at Saint-Denis would explode into a full-blown phenomenon. For the next 4 centuries, Europe would be locked in a frenzy of stone-cutting, scaffold-climbing, stained glass assembling madness. The demand for skilled artisans, for master masons, for sculptors and glaziers skyrocketed. Entire industries sprang up around these construction sites, supplying timber, iron, lead, and glass. The financial investment was staggering, often draining the coffers of entire regions for generations. Yet the desire to build higher, wider, more gloriously seemed insatiable. And the craziest part? Most of these cathedrals took centuries to build. Entire generations would be born and die before the final spire was added. This wasn't just construction. It was faith made physical, one flying buttress at a time. It was a testament to patience, to collective vision, to an unwavering belief in a future beyond mortal comprehension. Think of the dust that would cling to everything, the fine grit of stone settling on clothes, in hair, on the very eyelashes of those working tirelessly. The constant chorus of chisels, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap, building to a crescendo of human effort. Behind every cathedral wasn't just divine inspiration. It was an army of dirt-covered geniuses. And at the front of that army, the master mason. Not a priest, not a noble, but a glorified stone nerd with a compass, a chisel, and a death wish. These were the rock stars of the Middle Ages, except they didn't wear leather. They wore linen covered in limestone dust. Their hands, gnarled and powerful, carried the marks of a lifetime spent shaping raw earth into monumental art. Master builders weren't just contractors. They were architects, engineers, artists, and sometimes borderline cult leaders. Because when you're asking peasants to haul multi-ton stones 50 feet into the air using ropes and wooden pulleys, you better have charisma or at least a very convincing floor plan. The air would have been thick with the smell of sweat and raw earth, the groaning of straining ropes, the creak of wooden scaffolding that towered precariously into the sky. But here's the twist. Most of these men weren't nobles. They rose through the guild system, beginning as lowly apprentices, sweeping floors and fetching tools. Their journey was long, arduous, and fraught with peril. Then they became journeymen, travelling from site to site, cathedral to cathedral, picking up secrets like Pokemon cards, each new technique a valuable acquisition. They would carry their tools, their meagre belongings, and their growing knowledge from one great project to the next, learning from diverse approaches and challenges. Only after decades of experience, and possibly losing a few toes or fingers to the ever-present dangers of the job, would one be trusted with the title of master and the math terrifying. Without calculators or modern geometry textbooks, these builders figured out how to distribute weight from ceilings the height of a redwood tree, across vaults, down columns, and out through flying buttresses. If they got it wrong, entire sections could collapse, and often did. There were collapses in Beauvais, in Lincoln, even parts of Cologne. Each disaster became a lesson for the next project, a grim but vital step in the evolution of architectural understanding. For the workers, a collapse would have been a terrifying event, a sudden rumble and roar of falling stone, followed by screams and the acrid smell of dust and broken dreams. But for every failure there was a marvel. The precision in places like Reims or Amiens Cathedral is enough to make modern engineers sweat. These men calculated angles by eye, with strings and chalk, creating load-bearing marvels that still stand centuries later. They worked with stone cutters, woodworkers, glaziers, and labourers in what was essentially the most chaotic group project of the century. They didn't just draw blueprints. They commanded entire construction ecosystems, managing hundreds, sometimes thousands of workers, coordinating materials, and solving problems on the fly. And sometimes they died before their vision was completed, leaving their successor to guess what on earth they were thinking when they sketched that weird triple arch over the nave. The Gothic cathedrals, these magnificent stone dreams, were born of immense human effort, staggering intellectual prowess, and an unshakable faith that pierced the very sky. As you settle deeper, let your mind drift through the long echoes of their construction, feeling the quiet determination of those who built for eternity. Chapter 4. The Art and Engineering of the Gothic. Gothic cathedrals weren't just big. They were alive with stories, symbols, saints, monsters, and morals chiseled into every surface. If you couldn't read Latin, no problem. The stone would preach to you. Imagine the intricate detail, the countless hours poured into each figure, each leaf, each fold of drapery. The feeling of cool, smooth stone beneath your fingertips as you trace the lines of a saint's robe, or the rough, textured surface of a gargoyle's snarling face. The air inside these burgeoning spaces would have been cool and still, carrying the faint scent of stone dust and the lingering echo of chisels. Let's start with the portals. These weren't doors, they were divine gatekeepers. Imagine walking into church beneath rows of saints, apostles, and the Last Judgment, all staring down at you, carved into arch after arch. Jesus at the center, serene but judging. Sinners being dragged to hell by demons, right next to merchants and bakers. A subtle message, pay your tithe or else. The sheer density of narrative, frozen in stone, would have been overwhelming, yet endlessly fascinating. Each figure told a story, a moral lesson, a warning, or a promise. The texture of the stone would vary, from smoothly polished faces to rough, unfinished garments, inviting the eye to linger, to absorb the silent sermon. And gargoyles. They weren't just medieval waterspouts, they were theological bouncers, meant to terrify evil spirits and perhaps a few ill-behaved parishioners. Grotesques snarled from rooftops, stretching their stone faces in eternal agony or laughter. Some were demons, some were hybrids, dogs with human faces, bishops with wings. Every cathedral had a beastie carved into its skin, often in unexpected places, waiting to be discovered by a curious eye. Imagine the delight, or perhaps the shiver of unease, upon spotting one of these strange creatures peering down from a high ledge, their vacant stone eyes reflecting the muted light. Their presence, both whimsical and fearsome, added to the cathedral's mystique, a reminder that the sacred and the profane often coexisted in the medieval mind. Inside, the columns weren't plain cylinders. They were forests of symbolism. Capitals at the tops of pillars held tiny sculpted dramas. Cain killing Abel, drunken Noah flashing his sons, or monks fighting snails. Don't ask. The sheer variety of these miniature scenes meant that every visit could reveal something new, a hidden joke or a profound theological point tucked away in an easily missed corner. The choir stalls were even cheekier. Hidden in the woodwork were carvings of flatulent peasants, lusty monks, and animals doing very unholy things. These secret, sometimes subversive carvings provided a moment of human levity in an otherwise solemn space, a testament to the artisans' wit and perhaps their quiet rebellion against the strictures of the church. The scent of old wood, polished and worn smooth by centuries of hands, would have permeated these spaces, a comforting, grounding smell. But it wasn't all jokes and damnation. The stonework was also a Bible in 3D. From the creation to the Passion of Christ, from Old Testament kings to obscure local saints, every inch taught a lesson. These cathedrals were theology textbooks for the illiterate, monumental sermons frozen in limestone. The sheer labor involved in carving these narratives into hard stone, often by candlelight or the dim light filtering through the nascent windows, is almost beyond comprehension. And the artisans, they worked in secret. Most didn't sign their names. Their reward wasn't fame, it was faith. Though occasionally one would sneak in a signature, a tiny self-portrait perhaps, or a carved insult aimed at a rival mason 2 levels below. The stone told stories, but also served as propaganda. Kings, bishops, and local patrons often demanded their own faces appear beside saints. Political rivals were turned into demons. Enemies of the church found themselves eternally boiling in bas-relief hells, their stone faces twisted in eternal agony. Step inside a Gothic cathedral, and the first thing you'd notice after your neck started to ache from looking up was the light. Not just sunlight, but coloured light, divine light, light that told stories and made you feel like you'd walked into another world entirely. Welcome to the age of stained glass. In the Gothic mind, light wasn't just illumination, it was theology. God was light, and the cathedral was supposed to be a taste of heaven on earth, so of course it needed windows that glowed with celestial fire. Imagine the overwhelming sensation as the light, fractured and reassembled into brilliant hues, fell upon the cold stone, warming it with an inner glow. The air might even feel different, thinner, more sacred. The windows were massive, especially compared to their Romanesque predecessors. And they weren't just decoration. They were epic murals in glass. The rose windows of Chartres and Notre Dame, they're basically round, radiant comic books. You'd see the creation of the world in one panel, Noah's Ark in another, and a full genealogy of Christ squeezed into a kaleidoscope of red and blue. Every pane had meaning. Red stood for blood and martyrdom, blue for the Virgin Mary, gold for divine light, green for rebirth. Each piece was hand-cut, painted with fine lines of iron oxide, then fired in a kiln. The result, glass that could outlast kingdoms. The intricate leading, holding together thousands of small jewel-toned pieces, would have caught the light in mesmerizing ways, creating a shimmering, dynamic tapestry. These weren't solo projects either. Stained glass artists worked in teams. Designers, colorists, painters, glass cutters, all orchestrated like a medieval film studio. And the funding often crowdsourced. Local guilds would sponsor entire windows, sometimes sneaking in a self-serving panel at the bottom. This window donated by the fishmongers. May their herring always be fresh. The effect on worshippers, pure awe. Imagine you're a peasant from a village where your biggest excitement is the yearly pig slaughter. Then you walk into Chartres and, boom, walls of light, saints beaming down in ruby and sapphire, halos blazing brighter than the sun. It was like stepping into the New Jerusalem. The sheer scale, the vibrant colors, the way the light shifted and danced with every cloud passing overhead, it would have been a profoundly spiritual, almost hallucinatory experience. But there was more than just beauty. The windows preached. You'd learn the life of Christ in sequenced panels, see the virtues battling the vices, spot allegories of sin and redemption, all without needing to read a word. And as the sun moved, so did the mood. Morning brought golden warmth. Midday filled the nave with holy fire. At dusk, the windows flickered like dying embers, reminding everyone that light, like life, was fleeting. The entire structure was a living, breathing sermon, a physical manifestation of faith built for eternity. Feel the quiet hum of history now, letting your breathing slow with the gentle rhythm of centuries passing. To the average medieval villager, flying buttresses probably looked like architectural witchcraft. Big stone arms launching out from the cathedral's walls, connected to piers that didn't even touch the building. Madness. But to the master builders, these strange limbs were the secret weapon of the Gothic Revolution. Here's the problem they had to solve. Gothic cathedrals were tall, insanely tall. The ceilings reached 100 feet or more. And those towering ribbed vaults, they pushed tons of weight outward, not just down. If you didn't support that sideways thrust, your fancy church would become a very expensive pile of rubble. The threat of collapse was ever present, a constant tension beneath the grandeur. Enter the flying buttress, a structural cheat code. Instead of building thick, heavy walls like the Romanesque churches, Gothic architects wanted walls full of windows. And since windows are basically architectural holes, they needed something else to hold the building up. That something else was the flying buttress, an external arch that caught the outward force of the ceiling and channeled it safely into a distant pier. The result? Interior walls could be thin, open, and filled with glorious stained glass. The air within the nave felt lighter, freer, allowing the sound of hymns and prayers to reverberate with a soaring quality. But these weren't just functional bones. They became part of the cathedral's aesthetic. Builders sculpted them, decorated them with pinnacles and crockets, even turned them into miniature stone forests. Look at Notre Dame of Paris or Amiens Cathedral, and you'll see these buttresses marching like Gothic soldiers around the apse. Each one was a mathematical triumph. They had to be placed precisely, angled correctly, and balanced with the exact amount of counterweight. Too weak, and they'd snap under pressure. Too strong, and they'd crush the nave. It was a medieval Goldilocks problem, except the porridge was tons of granite, and failure meant disaster. The constant, subtle tension of the stone, holding immense weight in delicate balance, would have been a marvel to witness, even if you didn't understand the engineering. Of course, not every experiment went well. Beauvais cathedral famously overreached. It aimed to be the tallest of them all, but despite flying buttresses and reinforcements, parts of it collapsed several times. It remains unfinished to this day, a testament to ambition sometimes outstripping capability. Proof that even the best builders could fly too close to the architectural sun. But when they got it right, the effect was gravity-defying. You'd walk into a space that felt like it was floating. Walls disappeared. The ceiling hovered like a cloud. And you had to ask yourself, how is this even standing? The feeling of immensity, coupled with an almost impossible lightness, would have been profoundly moving, a testament to the human spirit reaching for the divine. Just let yourself float now, gently, in the quiet space of your own mind. Chapter 5. The Fall of Acre. The Siege Begins. By the late 13th century, the age of Crusader kingdoms in the Holy Land was crumbling into dust. The great Christian conquests, Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, had all fallen one by one. All that remained of nearly 200 years of European crusading effort was the port city of Acre, a final, flickering outpost on the Mediterranean coast, a symbol of glory turned into a fortress of desperation. Acre wasn't just another city. It was the Crusader capital, the beating heart of what was left of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a place of stone walls, Gothic churches, and clashing cultures. The air would have been thick with the scent of salt and the sea, mingling with the dry dust of the land, the aroma of spices from distant markets, and the unmistakable odor of a crowded living city. It was packed with merchants from Genoa and Venice, their voices sharp in bargaining, their silks and spices brought from faraway lands. Warrior monks from the Templars and Hospitallers, their armor clanking, their faces grim and weathered by years of conflict, moved through the streets, a constant reminder of the city's military purpose. Nobles, clinging to titles long stripped of real power, tried to maintain an air of pomp and ceremony amidst the growing sense of doom. But beneath the wealth and towering battlements, Acre was a powder keg. The European factions within the city spent as much time fighting each other as preparing for the inevitable siege. Petty rivalries over trade, territory, and influence constantly simmered, often boiling over into open street brawls. The writing had been on the wall for years. The Mamluks, a military elite from Egypt, had steadily wiped out every Crusader stronghold in their path. Under Sultan Qalawun and later his son al-Ashraf Khalil, the Mamluks crushed city after city, leaving ruin in their wake. And they didn't negotiate, they erased. The whispers of their advance would have preceded them, tales of brutal efficiency and utter ruthlessness chilling the hearts of Acre's inhabitants. The distant glint of their banners, the low thrum of their war drums, these were sounds that promised destruction. In 1290, a foolish spark ignited the storm. Newly arrived Crusaders, hot-headed and ignorant, massacred Muslim merchants in Acre during a drunken rampage. It was exactly the excuse the Mamluks needed. Khalil, a man of cold precision and unyielding will, declared war. By April of 1291, his massive army, possibly over 100,000 strong, had encircled the city. Imagine the sheer scale of it. A vast, dark tide of humanity stretching across the plains, their camps extending as far as the eye could see. The sound of their preparations, a low, ominous hum, would have drifted over the city walls day and night. Siege towers were rolled forward, monstrous wooden structures that clawed at the sky, designed to bring attackers level with the city's battlements. Tunnels were dug under the walls, a silent, unseen threat gnawing at the very foundations of Acre. Catapults hurled stone and fire day and night, a relentless bombardment that tore chunks from towers, shattered rooftops, and sent splinters of masonry through homes, churches, and courtyards. The air filled with the dust of destruction, the acrid smell of burning wood, and the screams of the wounded. Each thud of a catapult stone against the walls would have reverberated through the very ground, a constant, sickening rhythm of impending doom. Inside the city, panic swelled. The defenders, while courageous, were hopelessly outnumbered. Appeals for reinforcements to Europe went uncertain, lost in the political squabbles and internal conflicts of distant kings. Acre was isolated, cut off by land and soon by sea. Still, the defenders clung to hope. The double walls of Acre had resisted sieges before, a source of pride and a perceived impregnability. The Templars and Hospitallers prepared for the worst, their faces grim, their vows of fighting to the death echoing in the tense quiet of their command centers. Noble families packed their treasures, hoping for some miraculous escape. Priests offered prayers, their voices strained with urgency, their incense doing little to mask the scent of fear. Soldiers sharpened blades that would likely never leave their sheaths, their hands trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge of what was to come. Because this wouldn't be a siege for ransom or territory. This would be the end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. On April 5, 1291, the siege of Acre officially began. The Mamluk army, led by Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil, had arrived in force. Engineers, archers, elite cavalry, and enough siege equipment to flatten a city twice the size. They surrounded Acre on all sides, building massive wooden siege towers and digging trenches, while war drums thundered across the plains outside the city's great walls. The sound wasn't just for intimidation. It was a promise, no mercy. The rhythmic, relentless beat of those drums would have been a constant, chilling presence, vibrating through the stone walls, seeping into the very consciousness of those trapped within. Inside Acre, the defenders stared out at a sea of tents and banners, a vast alien landscape that promised only destruction. The Mamluks were experienced and disciplined. This wasn't some ragtag force. These were the same warriors who had defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut, destroyed Antioch, and taken Tripoli. Their track record was clear. When they came, cities burned. The air outside the walls would have shimmered with the heat of the approaching army, a visual manifestation of their overwhelming power. The Crusaders responded as best they could. The Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights took up their positions on the battlements, their distinctive white, black, and red crosses standing stark against the grey sky, a defiant splash of colour against the encroaching darkness. Civilians were pressed into carrying water, repairing damage, and building makeshift barricades, their fear palpable in their hurried movements and whispered prayers. Priests walked the walls, offering last rites to men who hadn't even drawn swords yet, their voices trembling with a mixture of faith and despair. The pervasive scent of fear and sweat would have hung heavy in the air, mixing with the dust and the metallic tang of impending battle. But the unity inside the city was a fragile illusion. The Italians, Venetians, Genoese, and Pisans bickered over ships and control of the harbour, their commercial rivalries overshadowing the existential threat. French and English factions distrusted each other, their national loyalties often eclipsing their shared religious cause. The King of Jerusalem, Henry II of Cyprus, was technically in command, but he was more figurehead than leader, lacking the charisma or authority to truly unite the disparate forces. No single strategy united them. This internal discord was a festering wound, weakening the city from within even as the external pressure mounted. Meanwhile, the Mamluks wasted no time. Their sappers began tunnelling under Acre's outer walls, placing wooden supports and filling the shafts with flammable materials. When lit, these tunnels would collapse the walls from below, creating catastrophic breaches. Siege engines hurled massive stones day and night, pounding towers, smashing rooftops, and sending splinters of masonry through homes, churches, and courtyards. Each day more of the city crumbled, the sound of collapsing stone a constant, dreadful refrain. Each night the defenders rebuilt, exhausted, outmatched, their bodies aching, their hopes dimming with every rising sun. Khalil remained methodical. He knew Acre's walls were strong, but not unbreakable. He simply needed time. The defenders, already stretched thin, were trapped in a cycle of panic and false hope. The psychological warfare was just as brutal. Muslim heralds shouted promises of death if the city didn't surrender, their voices carrying chillingly across the short distance between the armies. Survivors from previous Mamluk conquests knew those weren't empty threats. Acre was isolated, surrounded, and running out of time. The silence of the night was often punctuated by the crashing of stones, the distant shouts, and the mournful cries of those who had lost everything. Just let the sounds fade, feeling the quiet of your own space, allowing peaceful rest to settle. Chapter 6. The Fall of Acre, the Final Stand and Aftermath. As April turned into May, Acre's walls still stood, but barely. The constant pounding of Mamluk siege engines had reduced towers to rubble, breached outer defences, and left the streets littered with debris. The air was thick with the dust of pulverized stone, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke and the coppery tang of fresh blood. Every breath would have tasted of desperation. The city's defenders clung to their remaining strongpoints, exhausted and outnumbered, but not yet broken. Their faces, gaunt and grim, were smeared with dust and sweat, their eyes haunted by the relentless onslaught. The Templars and Hospitallers led the charge, literally and figuratively. These weren't green recruits, they were veterans of brutal wars, trained for moments like this. Clad in chainmail, bearing blackened shields and blood-stained tunics, they launched counterattacks from the inner walls and towers, hoping to stall the Mamluk advance. Every sally outside the gate was a gamble. Sometimes they returned with heads, other times not at all. The clash of steel, the shouts of men, the guttural cries of those fighting for their lives, these sounds echoed constantly through the besieged city, a grim symphony of battle. The feel of rough, cold stone beneath their hands, the weight of their weapons, the persistent ache in their muscles were constant reminders of their grim reality. Inside the city, panic was spreading like wildfire. Civilians, women, children, merchants, priests crowded the docks, praying for ships that never came, their voices a rising chorus of fear and despair. Some tried to flee, bribing sailors for space aboard merchant vessels, their eyes wide with terror. Others turned to the church, clinging to relics and saints, hoping for divine intervention, their fervent prayers filling the air with a desperate hum. King Henry II of Cyprus had fled earlier, leaving behind a fractured command. Coordination among the defenders unraveled. The Genoese blamed the Pisans, who blamed the Templars, who blamed everyone else. It was a city besieged not only by the Mamluks, but by its own dysfunction, a house divided against itself. Still, there were moments of desperate heroism. One night, the Mamluks breached a small section of the wall near the tower of the legate. Expecting a quick slaughter, they poured through, only to be met by a sudden countercharge led by the Hospitallers. In the chaos, swords clashed in torchlight, bodies tumbled into the surf, and for a brief moment the Crusaders pushed them back. The breach was sealed temporarily, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. The taste of victory, however fleeting, was intoxicating, a brief respite from the constant dread. But these victories were fleeting. Food supplies began to dwindle, the gnawing hunger a constant companion for everyone, from noble to peasant. Wells were poisoned or destroyed by falling debris, forcing people to drink contaminated water. Disease crept through the refugee-packed quarters, a silent, insidious killer adding to the death toll. Rats fed on the dead in the streets, a horrifying sight that underlined the city's decay. Morale rotted with them, a subtle but pervasive despair that seeped into every heart. The defenders were running out of everything: men, weapons, time. Sultan Khalil, meanwhile, remained calm. His engineers dug deeper, his catapults fired higher, and his archers filled the skies with arrows, a constant deadly rain. He was in no rush. He knew Acre's time was measured in days, not weeks, and the final blow was almost ready. The defenders of Acre still prayed for a miracle. They continued their vigil, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of relief, their bodies aching, their spirits fraying. Just imagine the subtle shifts in the wind, carrying the distant shouts of the besiegers, the metallic scent of fear, and the lingering taste of dust. On May 18, 1291, the waiting ended. At dawn, the Mamluks launched their final assault. Siege towers rolled forward like monstrous beasts reaching for the heavens. Scaling ladders were raised, scores of men swarming up their rungs. Tunnels dug beneath Acre's eastern wall were packed with kindling and set ablaze. The ground trembled as fire devoured the wooden supports, and with a thunderous crack, a massive section of the wall gave way, stone, dust, and defenders collapsing into the moat below. The air was filled with a roar, a mix of the Mamluk war cry and the horrified screams of Acre's inhabitants. The horn of battle sounded, and the Mamluks surged through the breach. They poured in by the thousands, Mamluk heavy infantry, Sudanese archers, horsemen leading charges even within the crumbling city streets. The Crusaders met them with everything they had. Templar knights formed a shield wall, halberds ready, their white tunics stained with dust and grim determination. Hospitallers rallied the terrified civilians, herding them toward the docks, their voices hoarse with urgency. Priests shouted prayers over the din of clashing steel, their words swallowed by the tide of battle. But it wasn't enough. The defenders were too few, too tired, and too disorganized. The city that had once withstood wave after wave now cracked like old armor. The clang of swords on shields, the grunt of men in mortal combat, the sickening thud of bodies falling, these were the sounds of Acre's last moments. The taste of blood and dust filled the mouths of the fighting men. Buildings burned, homes collapsed, sending plumes of black smoke into the dim sky. The fighting moved from street to street, house to house, tower to tower. Every corner became a battlefield. The Genoese quarter fell first, overrun in hours. The Venetian compound held out longer, fortified like a mini fortress, but was eventually set aflame, its opulent buildings consumed by fire. Screams echoed from the alleys as the Mamluks advanced with ruthless precision. Those who resisted were slaughtered. Those who fled were hunted down. The air became thick with the smell of burning timber, human flesh, and the metallic tang of spilled blood. One of the last strongholds was the Templar fortress near the harbor. Thick walls, reinforced towers. It had been the final fallback point in case of disaster. Now it was the last place left. Inside, women and children huddled in cellars, while knights made a final stand on the battlements, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the encroaching enemy. From the roof they could see the city dying. Acre, once the pride of the Crusader kingdoms, now a furnace of smoke and blood. As night fell, the Crusader resistance collapsed. Most surviving knights fell back to the docks, hoping to escape by sea. The harbor became a desperate bottleneck. Families crammed onto overcrowded ships, shouting, crying, some leaping into the water in panic, their hopes for salvation clinging to the last few vessels. Only a few vessels made it out before the Mamluks seized control of the port. By the end of the day, Acre was no longer a city. It was a graveyard, its silence now more terrifying than the cacophony of battle. As the rest of Acre burned and bled, one bastion still held, the Templar fortress, a massive stone complex near the sea. Its walls had resisted Mamluk sieges before. Now it became the last shelter for hundreds of survivors, knights, women, children, and priests, all crammed into the great halls, praying the walls would hold just one day longer. The fortress was commanded by Peter de Bouget, the Templar Marshal of Acre. He knew what was coming. He ordered the gates barred, the battlements manned, and the underground passages sealed. The knights stood shoulder to shoulder, some wounded, others barely able to lift their swords. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to die with purpose, their faces set in grim determination, their breath heavy with effort. Outside, the Mamluks surrounded the fortress. Sultan Halil sent envoys to negotiate a surrender. The terms were harsh: imprisonment for the knights, slavery for civilians. The Templars refused. They had no illusions about mercy. The Mamluks brought up siege engines and began their final push. Day after day they battered the walls, but the fortress was built to withstand far worse. For over a week the Templars held them off, firing from towers, hurling stones, pouring boiling oil on attackers who dared the ladders. Inside, conditions were dire. Food had nearly run out. The wounded groaned in the dark. Children cried, their small voices a heartbreaking counterpoint to the sounds of battle. But still they fought. One knight reportedly dragged himself to the wall with a broken leg just to hurl a stone before collapsing. The air inside would have been thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and unwashed bodies, punctuated by the metallic scent of blood. Then, on May 28th, disaster struck. The Mamluks breached the outer wall of the fortress. Fighting raged inside the courtyard. Templars, civilians, everyone capable picked up a weapon. It was hand-to-hand combat, brutal and unrelenting. The defenders were pushed back into the inner chambers of the fortress, step by bloody step. Realizing the end had come, the Templars made a desperate decision. They collapsed part of the fortress on purpose. In a final act of defiance, they lured Mamluk troops into the lower chambers and detonated the underground armory. The explosion ripped through the walls, killing attackers and defenders alike in a storm of fire and stone, a final defiant roar. The fortress fell, but it didn't surrender. The last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land had gone down, not with submission, but with fury. Acre was lost. The dream of Christendom in the East shattered. When the smoke cleared, Acre was no longer a city. What had once been the vibrant capital of the Crusader estates, bustling with markets, churches, and foreign embassies, was now a field of ash and corpses. The Mamluks had taken it all, street by street, wall by wall, and they left nothing behind but ruin. Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil didn't just want victory, he wanted erasure. He ordered the complete demolition of the city's fortifications. Every tower, every wall, every stone that had once protected the Crusaders was pulled down or shattered. The harbor was filled with rubble. The churches, some centuries old, were stripped, burned, or turned to mosques. What couldn't be reused was destroyed. The destruction was systematic. This wasn't vengeance, it was strategy. Khalil wanted to make sure Acre would never again be a foothold for Europe, never again a landing point for crusading armies, never again a symbol of Christian presence in the East. Those few who survived, mostly non-combatants who'd been captured, were enslaved or executed. Some noble women were taken into the harems of Mamluk elites. Some children were sold in markets from Cairo to Damascus. Their names vanished, their stories ended in silence. The sea was choked with the wreckage of broken ships and bloated bodies. And the stench, it lingered for weeks, months even, a horrifying reminder of the massacre. News of the fall reached Europe like a slap. Panic swept through the courts of France and England. Popes wept. Preachers called for another crusade. But the willpower was gone. The last spark of crusading fervor had died with the walls of Acre. The kings of Europe had their own wars, their own dynasties to worry about. The Holy Land was lost, and they knew it. The Templars, once the elite warriors of Christendom, were shattered by the loss. They returned to Europe, bruised and aimless. Their power would never recover. In less than 2 decades, they would be dissolved entirely, accused of heresy, tortured, and executed. The fall of Acre was the beginning of their end. And for the Mamluks, Acre's conquest was a jewel in their crown. The dream of a Crusader kingdom in the Levant had finally been crushed beneath their boots. But the deeper legacy of the siege was just beginning. Because while the city died, the myth of Acre, of Crusader glory and tragic collapse, was only just being born. Just breathe now, letting the echoes of ancient battles fade into the quiet. Feel the weight of the past lift, leaving only the calm rhythm of your breath. Chapter 7. Livia Drusilla, Architect of an Empire. Livia Drusilla was born in 58 BCE, at a time when the Roman Republic was convulsing. The daughter of Marcus Livius Drusus Claudianus, she came from a long line of patricians with a taste for power and a talent for surviving Rome's endless political bloodsport. Her birthright was privilege, but her world was chaos. Rome in the late Republic wasn't just politically unstable, it was an open wound. Civil wars raged between power-hungry generals. Alliances shattered like pottery, and assassination was practically a career move. For a girl like Livia, raised in this furnace, the lesson was clear. Beauty might earn attention, but intellect, loyalty, and cold calculation earned survival. The air of Rome itself would have been thick with the scent of ambition, fear, and the occasional whiff of recent violence, a constant reminder of the precariousness of life and status. At just 15, Livia was married off to her cousin, Tiberius Claudius Nero, a staunch supporter of the Republic and an enemy of Julius Caesar. This wasn't a love match. It was a political maneuver, as most Roman marriages were, designed to solidify alliances and shore up family power. But young Livia quickly adapted to the role of Roman matron, loyal wife, mother-to-be, and quiet observer of the volatile tides around her. She learned to navigate the complex social rituals, the subtle cues of power, and the unspoken rules of Rome's elite. The rustle of her rich silk stola, the faint scent of olive oil and expensive perfumes would have accompanied her as she moved through the formal spaces of Roman society, always composed, always observing. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, the real fireworks began. Civil war returned with a vengeance. Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's heir, fought to fill the vacuum. And Livia, she and her husband, ended up on the losing side. Pregnant with her second child, she was forced to flee Rome, moving from one temporary refuge to another, while her husband dodged Octavian's wrath. Imagine the fear, the constant uncertainty, the gnawing anxiety of being a pregnant woman on the run, dependent on the fickle loyalties of others. The coarse feel of rough travel cloaks, the chill of nights spent in unfamiliar places, the distant rumble of marching armies, these would have been the visceral realities of her exile. That journey through exile, hardship, and near constant uncertainty hardened her. It hardened her. It forged a core of resilience and a deep understanding of survival. And when she returned to Rome under a fragile amnesty, she didn't just return as a survivor. She returned as someone to watch, someone who had seen the raw face of power and understood its brutal cost. That's when she met Octavian. He was 24, she was 19. Both were married. But when Octavian saw Livia, he saw something more than beauty. He saw an equal, a mind as sharp and a will as strong as his own. Within months, both divorced their spouses. And in one of the most eyebrow-raising political marriages in Roman history, Octavian married Livia while she was visibly pregnant with her former husband's child. The scandal would have rippled through Rome's gossipy elite like wildfire, a mixture of shock, disapproval, and grudging admiration for their audacity. For the rest of her life, she would remain at Octavian's side. And when he became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, Livia became more than just his wife. She became his advisor, his partner, and some whispered his puppeteer. The rustle of her stola, the quiet dignity of her bearing, masked a mind that was constantly calculating, constantly shaping the future of Rome from behind the scenes. Her influence was subtle, pervasive, like the pervasive scent of incense in a temple, always present but rarely directly seen. When Livia married Octavian in 38 BCE, the Roman elite choked on their wine. He was a rising political star, soon to become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. And she was a pregnant, recently divorced woman. Scandalous didn't begin to cover it. But Augustus didn't care. He saw beyond the societal norms, recognizing a unique intellect and strength. And Livia, she knew exactly what she was doing. Unlike his previous wife, Scribonia, whom Augustus dismissed on the day their daughter was born, Livia was no emotional distraction. She was quiet, calculating, and politically shrewd. Augustus didn't just marry a woman. He gained a strategist, a confidant, a silent partner in the grand project of building an empire. From the moment she entered his home, Livia positioned herself not as a decorative partner, but as a co-ruler in all but title. She hosted salons, intellectual gatherings, where she subtly influenced public opinion and political alliances. She courted senators with charm and quiet persuasion, earning their respect and sometimes their fear. She advised her husband on political rivals, her whispers often leading to their quiet downfall. From the moment she entered his home, Livia positioned herself not as a decorative partner, but as a co-ruler in all but title. She hosted salons, intellectual gatherings, where she subtly influenced public opinion and political alliances. She courted senators with charm and quiet persuasion, earning their respect and sometimes their fear. She advised her husband on political rivals, her whispers often leading to their quiet downfall. And she carefully cultivated her image as the ideal Roman matron, dignified, obedient, loyal. Her modest attire, always chosen with meticulous care, spoke volumes, projecting an image of traditional virtue in a city increasingly prone to excess. But beneath the modest stola and veiled head was a mind sharper than half the Senate combined. Though she never received the title of empress during her lifetime, there was no such formal role, Livia wielded influence from behind the curtain. She was given her own household, her own finances, and even her own bodyguard. That was unheard of for a Roman woman. But Augustus trusted her implicitly, and Livia played the long game. She didn't push for public power. She made herself indispensable instead, becoming an essential, unshakable pillar of the nascent empire. The faint scent of her simple, elegant perfumes would have hinted at her presence, a subtle yet powerful aura. When Augustus was away, Livia managed his affairs, overseeing vast estates and complex financial dealings with quiet efficiency. When senators plotted, she whispered counterplots, her keen intelligence anticipating their moves. When rivals rose, they often fell, sometimes with suspicious speed. Livia's fingerprints were rarely visible, but her presence loomed behind the scenes like a quiet spectre. And perhaps most important of all, Livia never gave Augustus a son. Their marriage was childless. But rather than fade into irrelevance, she ensured her own son from her first marriage, Tiberius, stayed close to the imperial orbit, setting him on a path towards power. Livia wasn't interested in being queen. She wanted to found a dynasty, to secure the future of Rome through her lineage. To outsiders, she appeared passive, graceful, pious. She attended religious ceremonies with utmost solemnity, praised Augustus in public with unwavering loyalty, and lived modestly in a city obsessed with excess. Her public persona was one of gentle strength and unwavering virtue, a calm presence amidst the turbulent currents of imperial politics. But those who underestimated her did so at their peril. Because while Augustus consolidated the Roman world with legions and decrees, Livia shaped the empire in silence, with whispers, favors, and quiet erasures. The question is, just how far would she go to protect the dynasty she was building? Rumors, as we'll see, suggest she didn't stop at political advice. Just breathe and let the quiet strength of Livia's ambition settle around you as you drift further into your peaceful rest. For all her public grace and devotion, Livia Drusilla's name has always carried a scent of suspicion, specifically the sharp, sweet scent of poison. As Rome transitioned from republic to empire, rivals to Augustus fell like dominoes. And though history doesn't record Livia's hand on the cup, it certainly doesn't rule it out. The air in the imperial court would have been heavy with unspoken fears, the subtle scent of suspicion mingling with expensive perfumes and the dry dust of power. The most infamous accusation is that Livia systematically eliminated anyone who stood between her son Tiberius and the imperial throne. Let's look at the body count. Marcellus, Augustus's nephew and early favorite, dead at 19, supposedly of illness. Gaius and Lucius Caesar, Augustus's grandsons and adopted heirs, both dead young, far from home, their promising lives cut short by mysterious ailments or unfortunate accidents. Agrippa Postumus, the brutish final grandson, disinherited and mysteriously murdered after Augustus's death, just as he seemed poised for a return to favor. All inconvenient, all removed. And Livia was always near, always observing, always present in the periphery of these tragic events. To her defenders, these deaths were tragic coincidences. Rome was full of disease, especially for young men embarking on strenuous military campaigns, and power games were brutal, often ending in natural, if untimely, deaths. To her critics, Livia was the Roman Lady Macbeth, working quietly, removing pawns, and setting the board so only her son remained standing. Ancient gossip, especially from writers like Tacitus and Cassius Dio, leaned into this narrative. They painted Livia as cool, cunning, and ruthlessly maternal, driven by an unyielding ambition for her son. They suggested she was the real architect of the imperial succession, not Augustus, her influence so pervasive that it subtly reshaped the very fabric of the state. In some versions, she even doctored Augustus's will, or concealed his death long enough to secure a smooth transfer of power to Tiberius, ensuring no last-minute changes or unexpected challenges could derail her carefully laid plans. The quiet rustle of her robe, the almost imperceptible shift in her expression. These were her tools, not daggers or poison vials, yet just as deadly. But it's important to separate smoke from fire. There's no hard evidence Livia poisoned anyone, no confession, no trial. Her alleged victims died far from Rome, in ambiguous circumstances. The Roman elite loved a good conspiracy, especially when powerful women were involved, eager to attribute such cunning to female machinations. Still, the pattern is convenient. Too many rivals dead, too many inheritances redirected, too many murmurs in the dark. The constant quiet tension in the court, the unspoken fears among those who stood in the line of succession. These were the subtle indicators of Livia's pervasive influence. Even Augustus, who loved and trusted Livia deeply, once joked that she was more concerned with the empire than with his health. It may have been said in jest, but like most Roman jokes, it carried a dagger underneath, hinting at a truth he might have subconsciously acknowledged. Whether Livia truly slipped poison into cups or simply outmaneuvered her enemies with charm and strategy, the result was the same. One by one, the path to power cleared, and as the years passed, it became undeniable. Livia wasn't just building a dynasty, she was eliminating the competition, with a quiet, relentless efficiency that was truly terrifying. The soft sigh of relief she might have felt with each removal, hidden behind a composed expression, was her silent victory. Tiberius was no golden boy. He lacked the charm of Marcellus, the popularity of Gaius and Lucius, or the legacy of Julius Caesar. He was awkward, cold, and deeply introverted, a man better suited for brooding alone on a cliff in Rhodes than standing at the head of the Roman Empire. And yet, thanks to Livia, Tiberius became emperor. Just drift now, letting the whispers of ancient power struggles fade as you feel deeper into sleep. Livia's mission to elevate her son wasn't easy. Augustus didn't trust him, finding him aloof and ill-suited for the public role of emperor. Tiberius had a military mind, disciplined and effective on the battlefield, but little love for politics or the endless glad-handing of Roman public life. He was known for his moodiness, his disappearances, and his very public retirement from Roman life in 6 BCE, a sulky middle finger to both Augustus and Livia, a stark demonstration of his resistance to the path laid out for him. The tension between mother and son would have been a palpable undercurrent in the imperial household, a quiet strain beneath the surface of polite interaction. But Livia was relentless. She orchestrated his return from Rhodes, gently but firmly bringing him back into the imperial fold. Slowly, methodically, she eliminated rivals and wore down Augustus's resistance. With each imperial disappointment, Marcellus's early death, Lucius's sudden illness, Gaius's failed eastern expedition, Tiberius looked more and more like the least worst option, the only viable heir left standing. The sheer determination in Livia's quiet gaze, the steel beneath her velvet exterior, would have been evident to anyone who watched her closely. Eventually, Augustus adopted him formally as son and successor. It wasn't love, it was resignation, a weary acceptance of the inevitable. And when Augustus died in 14 CE, the empire passed to Tiberius. It should have been Livia's moment of triumph. Her son on the throne, her legacy secure. But power did strange things to Tiberius. Once in power, he grew even colder, paranoid, suspicious, his introverted nature hardening into outright misanthropy. He left the city for long stretches, withdrawing to the island of Capri, ruling through letters and delegating power to the monstrous Sejanus, his ambitious and ruthless Praetorian prefect. He resented the Senate, the people, and, increasingly, his own mother. The strain between them became an open secret, a raw wound in the heart of the imperial family. Livia, for her part, tried to maintain influence. She expected to be treated as Augustus had once treated her, as an advisor, a partner in the grand project of empire. She received the title Augusta, an unprecedented honor for a Roman woman, granted to her by Augustus's will. Coins were minted with her image, statues were erected in her honor, depicting her with serene, almost divine composure. She sat on a throne beside her son during public ceremonies, a silent testament to her enduring power. But behind closed doors, Tiberius simmered. He accused her of manipulating him, of orchestrating a life he didn't want, of suffocating his own will. He reportedly refused to consult her, leaving her isolated and increasingly frustrated. And most scandalously, he didn't attend her funeral when she died in 29 CE, leaving her corpse unburied for days, a final public insult to the woman who had given him everything. Livia may have won the war for succession, but she lost the battle for her son's affection. The quiet victory she achieved in securing his throne was soured by the bitter silence that grew between them. Livia Drusilla understood something most Roman men didn't. Real power didn't always come from the Senate or the battlefield. It came from perception. And so, while Augustus crafted the empire, Livia crafted herself into the ideal Roman woman. Not a queen, not a ruler, but something far more dangerous, a symbol. She dressed plainly in traditional stola and veil, never flaunting jewels or gold, always projecting an image of quiet dignity and modesty. Her hair was styled in the severe, modest fashion of Rome's matronly past, an unspoken connection to the virtues of old. Publicly, she praised simplicity, virtue, and piety, embodying the very ideals Rome claimed to cherish. The rustle of her plain garments, the gentle smile on her lips, belied the formidable intellect at work. Behind the scenes, she was directing networks of influence, managing vast estates, arranging marriages for her descendants, and shaping political futures with quiet, ruthless efficiency. But her greatest project was her own image. Livia became the poster woman for Roman values, the embodiment of a new imperial virtue. Statues of her popped up across the empire, not just in Rome, but in distant provinces where loyalty to the new imperial order needed reinforcing. These weren't statues of goddesses or warriors. They showed her seated, serene, motherly, a picture of domestic tranquility that belied her vast power. The message was clear. Rome's new empire was safe in the hands of a wise, moral, and traditional woman. It was a masterclass in soft power, in wielding influence through carefully constructed perception. She sponsored public works and religious rituals, aligning herself with the goddess Ceres and the cult of Vesta, symbols of fertility and domestic order, further solidifying her image as a benevolent, stabilizing force. While Augustus claimed to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, Livia made sure that marble included her, intricately carved and widely disseminated. Even the coins changed. Some bore her face, something unheard of for a Roman woman during her lifetime, a direct testament to her unique status. Others referenced her virtues, pietas, concordia, Fortuna, subtly reinforcing her role as a guiding spirit of the empire. Livia wasn't just a matron, she was a moral compass carved in silver, a living testament to the values the new empire wished to project. This wasn't vanity, it was insurance. In a male-dominated world where women could be discarded at a whim, Livia embedded herself into Rome's political DNA. She wasn't an accessory to power, she was part of the machine, an essential cog in the imperial apparatus. And Augustus played along. He mentioned her prominently in his will, leaving her a third of his fortune, an immense sum that further solidified her independence. He even adopted her into the Julian family posthumously, giving her the name Julia Augusta, a political move, yes, but also a profound recognition of her indispensable role in building the empire. Through image, through patience, and through ruthless charm, Livia turned herself into something new, a Roman woman too powerful to ignore, too revered to remove, and too intelligent to underestimate. She was the quiet, unwavering force behind the throne, ensuring the continuity and stability of a nascent empire. Just breathe slowly, allowing yourself to drift into the quiet, feeling the ancient power of Rome settle into stillness around you. When you look at the mess that was the Julio-Claudian dynasty, madmen, monsters, and megalomaniacs, you'd never guess it was built by a soft-spoken woman in a stola. But Livia Drusilla wasn't just Rome's first lady. She was its dynastic engineer. Her long game began with her own son, Tiberius. She cleared the board for him, patiently removing every obstacle that stood in his path to the throne. But her ambitions didn't stop there. Her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and stepchildren all were woven into a spider's web of alliances, betrothals, and strategic placements. This wasn't family planning. This was imperial architecture, a complex blueprint for the future of Rome, meticulously laid out by a single, powerful hand. She arranged the marriage between her granddaughter Livilla and Drusus the Younger, her own grandson, consolidating power within her immediate family line. Another granddaughter, Julia the Younger, was tied to Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a prominent senator. Every move was a brick laid in the imperial foundation, designed to interweave the Julian and Claudian bloodlines, creating an unbreakable bond. But Livia wasn't just playing matchmaker. She was reinforcing bloodlines, consolidating loyalty, and keeping potential enemies under her watchful gaze. The quiet rustle of her robes, the serene expression on her face, masked a mind that was constantly calculating, constantly adjusting to the unpredictable tides of Roman politics. Even Germanicus, the wildly popular general and adopted son of Tiberius, had Livia's fingerprints on his ascent. He married Agrippina the Elder, Augustus's granddaughter, a union that united Julian and Claudian lines, a symbolic and strategic triumph that pleased both the people and the imperial family. Of course, dynasties built on politics and paranoia rarely stayed clean. Infighting erupted. Accusations of treason, adultery, and ambition flared among the imperial heirs, a constant simmering tension in the golden halls of the palace. And many historians believe Livia had a hand in steering or manipulating the chaos. If someone had to be exiled, discredited, or quietly vanished to preserve the dynasty's core, so be it. Her methods were ruthless, but always subtle, never leaving a direct trail back to her. And the irony. The Julio-Claudian line would spiral into madness. After Tiberius came Caligula, Germanicus's son, and one of history's most infamous tyrants. Then came Claudius, her great-nephew, and awkwardly her grandson-in-law, a scholar who unexpectedly found himself emperor. Then Nero, who was descended from both Livia's bloodline and her political plans, the final disastrous emperor of her engineered dynasty. By the time Nero fiddled while Rome burned, Livia's family tree looked more like a bonfire, consumed by internal strife and self-destruction. But make no mistake, every branch of that tree had been shaped by Livia, every major figure within it placed there by her meticulous long-term planning. While Augustus ruled an empire of marble and legions, Livia ruled a quieter empire, one of blood, marriage, and manipulation. Every emperor for the next half-century could trace his legitimacy back to her, a testament to her profound and enduring influence. In the history of dynasties, she wasn't just a link in the chain, she forged the chain, link by carefully calculated link. Livia Drusilla lived long, too long if you asked her son Tiberius. She had survived Julius Caesar's assassination, the fall of the Republic, a dozen rival heirs, and the transition into empire. She outlived Augustus, outmaneuvered her enemies, and turned her family into gods. The pervasive scent of old parchment and the faint metallic tang of history would cling to her, a testament to her long and impactful life. But in her final years, she found herself in an increasingly bitter standoff with the very man she had sacrificed everything to empower, Tiberius. Their relationship was never warm, but as emperor, Tiberius grew colder still. He resented her influence, her lingering presence in court, her continued efforts to advise and perhaps control him. And Livia, having spent decades guiding an empire, was not about to quietly retire to her villa. The court became tense, filled with unspoken resentments and simmering conflicts. Tiberius began retreating from Rome altogether, withdrawing to Capri in self-imposed exile, leaving governance in the hands of Sejanus, his ambitious and ruthless Praetorian prefect, further isolating his mother. Livia remained in Rome, surrounded by statues, honors, and the eerie quiet of being revered but no longer needed. The silent grandeur of her home, filled with the echoes of power and ambition, must have felt hollow without the daily involvement in the empire's affairs. When she fell ill in 29 CE, her death was not met with the mourning one might expect for the matriarch of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Tiberius refused to return to Rome. He didn't attend her funeral. He delayed her deification, denied her public honors, and most cruelly left her body unburied for days, a final public insult to the woman who had given him everything. For the woman who had shaped an empire, it was a cold and calculated dismissal. Was it petty vengeance, guilt, or perhaps a final act of defiance from a son who never asked to be emperor? Historians would later paint Tiberius as a brooding, paranoid ruler, haunted by his mother's legacy, constantly battling the shadow of her influence. Livia had orchestrated his rise, cleared his path, and ensured his power, but in doing so, she may have crushed whatever warmth existed between them. To Tiberius, her guidance likely felt more like a leash, binding him to a destiny he did not fully embrace. She died at age 86, having lived through nearly 9 decades of Rome's most transformative years. No other Roman woman had ever wielded such sustained influence or held court at the side of emperors for so long. And yet her final chapter was marked not by triumph, but by silence, betrayed not by enemies, but by the very son she had raised to rule. Livia Drusilla died immortal, but Rome wasn't finished with her yet. Though Tiberius refused to honor her properly in death, the empire she helped shape still remembered. Her grandchildren, especially the Emperor Claudius, her own great-nephew and grandson-in-law, would eventually restore her place in the imperial pantheon. In 42 CE, over a decade after her death, Claudius formally deified Livia. She became Diva Augusta, a state goddess. It was a final cosmic promotion for the woman who had spent her life manipulating power from the shadows, a posthumous recognition of her immense, if often hidden, contribution. Altars were built, priestesses appointed. Her image joined that of Augustus in temples and ceremonies. In death, she became what no woman before her had ever been, a god sanctioned by the Roman state. But sanctification didn't come with forgiveness. For centuries, Livia's name remained entangled in rumor, her legacy a subject of endless debate. Ancient historians, mostly male, were never quite sure what to make of her. Tacitus portrayed her as calculating, cold, a woman who excelled in the arts of her sex, a backhanded compliment perhaps. Cassius Dio cast her as an empress in all but name, domineering, manipulative, and possibly responsible for more than a few conveniently timed deaths. Then came Suetonius, with his blend of gossip and history. He didn't say outright that Livia poisoned Augustus, but he certainly let the rumor breathe, allowing it to hang heavy in the air, perpetuating the mystery. And yet, even her critics admitted her brilliance. She lived modestly, she ruled quietly. She never flaunted her influence, never gave a public speech, never took a formal political role. And yet she shaped the fate of Rome more than most men who wore the toga. Modern historians have tried to untangle fact from fantasy. Was she a murderer, or just a master strategist, a loyal wife, or a political operator? The truth may be all of the above, but her impact is undeniable. Without Livia, there is no Tiberius. Without Tiberius, there is no Julio-Claudian dynasty. Her hand guided the empire's first steps. Her lineage ruled its first century, and her myth haunted its historians for 2 millennia. In a city of emperors, conquerors, and demigods, Livia did what no woman had ever done. She ruled Rome from the shadows and ascended to the heavens, not by sword or speech, but by survival. In the end, Livia Drusilla's story isn't just about palaces, poisons, or statues. It's about how one woman navigated the sharpest political landscape in history without ever raising a sword or even her voice. Rome was a world that excluded women from real power, and yet somehow Livia rewrote the rules without ever admitting she held the pen. She never gave a speech in the Senate, never commanded an army, never held an official title during her husband's reign. And yet for 5 decades no major decision was made in the empire without her fingers brushing it first. A subtle, almost imperceptible touch that redirected the course of history. She made herself indispensable to Augustus, not through seduction or softness, but through loyalty, intelligence, and absolute control over her image. In a culture that worshipped modesty and virtue in women, she became the living embodiment of Roman virtue, turning tradition into a tool of power. She was the wife, the mother, the goddess, but she was also the chess master, the kingmaker, and some whispered the Queen of Rome in all but name. Her genius was subtlety. Where other women of the imperial family, like Messalina or Agrippina the Younger, would be vilified for ambition, Livia escaped condemnation, cloaked in virtue. She wore tradition like armor, using it to deflect criticism and consolidate her influence. And in doing so, she created the blueprint for every powerful Roman woman who came after her. But her legacy is complex. The dynasty she built would unravel into madness and murder, a tragic testament to the inherent instability of absolute power. Her descendants included emperors like Caligula and Nero, men whose excesses would stain the very name she had worked so hard to elevate. And her own relationship with Tiberius ended not in triumph, but in silence and coldness, a bitter personal cost for her dynastic ambition. Power came at a cost, both to those around her and to her own personal relationships. Yet, despite all that, Livia endures. She remains one of the most fascinating figures in ancient history, not because she ruled Rome like a man, but because she ruled it like no man ever could, with patience, with silence, with the terrifying brilliance of someone who understood that real power doesn't shout, it whispers. Livia Drusilla didn't just witness the birth of an empire, she midwifed it. She didn't just preserve a dynasty, she engineered it. And she didn't need a throne or crown to make history. All she needed was time, and Livia had mastered the long game from the very beginning. There have been bad years in history, plenty of them. 1347 had the Black Death. 1914 kicked off a world war. 2020, well, let's not open that can of face masks. But 536 AD still holds a special, ice-crusted place in the top 10 most unpleasant human experiences list. It wasn't just bad, it was comprehensively miserable. A multi-year disaster combo platter with extra doom on the side. What makes 536 so haunting isn't just the volcanic winter, the famine, the plague, or the population collapse. It's the fact that all these things happened together in a pre-modern world already balancing precariously on mud and superstition. Imagine surviving 1 year of near-permanent twilight, food shortages, and existential sermons. Then imagine year 2 shows up with a fresh volcanic eruption and a helpful reminder that you still haven't seen the sun. Then imagine the Black Death's less famous, equally rude cousin knocks on your city gate in year 5 and says, "Hi, I live here now." People back then didn't know what was happening. They had no word for climate disruption, no concept of volcanoes erupting thousands of miles away, and definitely no epidemiology podcasts. All they saw was a world that suddenly stopped making sense. And perhaps that's what really sticks with us. Because even now, with satellites, scientists, and 24/7 news cycles, there's something profoundly unnerving about a year when the sky went out and nobody knew why. It reminds us that nature doesn't need a reason. The planet can at any time throw a tantrum powerful enough to send us scrambling back to firewood and guesswork. And yet people endured. They suffered, starved, buried loved ones, and carried on. Not because they had answers, but because there wasn't really a choice. So yes, 536 was the worst year to be alive. And it lingered like a cosmic hangover for decades. But it's also a story of survival. Quiet, stubborn, frostbitten survival. And maybe that's what makes it so compelling. Because deep down, we all suspect that if the sun went out tomorrow, we'd still argue over bread prices, blame the government, and try to make stew from whatever's left, just like they did. As the stories settle now, feel your body growing heavy and soft. Let your mind clear, drifting away from the dust and shadows of the past. The cold centuries of dim skies. the towering ambition of stone cathedrals, the final cries of a Crusader city, and the silent, powerful influence of an ancient empress, they are all just echoes now, fading into the quiet. You've journeyed through time, witnessed history unfold, and now it's time to return to your own peaceful rest. The world of yesterday has receded, leaving you in the comforting embrace of the present. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to sink into a deep, restorative sleep. Good night, weary traveler. Sweet dreams.